The rooftop string lights flickered once, not from the wind, but as if they too paused to listen. 81 floors above Manhattan, she waited. She had on the dress he loved, the one with the open back and the simple neckline, the one he once traced with a fingertip and whispered, "You always look like you don't need anyone, and that's why I'm terrified of losing you." She smiled when he stepped closer. This time, she didn't expect a proposal. She expected truth. But what she got was a hand that never reached for hers, and a voice that chose legacy over love. "I can't choose you, Callis. There's too much at stake." Her name didn't shake in his mouth. His hands didn't tremble. His eyes didn't flinch. And that's what broke her more than anything. He had rehearsed this. He had decided. She was not part of the empire. She was part of the silence that came before it. Have you ever been loved behind closed doors, but abandoned in front of a crowd? Has someone ever told you they had no choice, but they still chose everything else over you? Callie Sorin gave 3 years to a man who promised her forever, then picked a merger over a marriage. But what if quiet heartbreak was the beginning of the kind of revenge no one saw coming? If you believe in second chances that don't include them, if you believe silence can be the sharpest form of power, then like, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Charles' Stories. Because this is not a story about begging. This is the story of what happens when you stop being their peace and become your own storm. The jazz band below played something soft, the kind of music that filled expensive evenings but never made headlines. Avon Kyrell, billionaire heir of Kyrell Holdings, stood less than 3 feet away from the woman who saw him before the world did, and he didn't flinch. He didn't stammer. He didn't apologize. "You deserve more than I can offer right now. This merger, the expansion, there are layers, Callis. I can't afford distractions." Distractions, that's what she had become. Not the girl who stayed up proofreading his press releases while he slept. Not the woman who kept his secrets when the media chased rumors. Not the partner who learned his patterns so deeply that his silence no longer scared her. A distraction. She didn't argue. Because women like her were taught early, you don't cry when they choose money. You step back and build something they'll never be able to buy. He turned to leave. Champagne glasses clinked in the distance. Board members waited with pen-signed papers and sleek smiles. And Avon Kyrell, once her entire sky, walked away without looking back. Not once. 3 years earlier. Same city, different rooftop. She wasn't wearing a gown. She wore a dark green turtleneck and jeans. The event was a sustainability gala. She had only been invited because her firm had quietly funded one of the tech panels. Most of the men at the event didn't remember her name. But Avon did, because when the mic cut out during his speech and the crowd laughed, she didn't. She watched him calmly adjust his collar, reset the mic, and continue without losing breath. Later, he passed her at the hors d'oeuvres table. "You didn't laugh. It wasn't funny." That was their first real exchange. He didn't flirt. He asked questions. And when he emailed her 2 days later, no assistant, no PR rep, just one sentence. "Would you meet me for coffee? I think you understand me better than most." She said yes. Not because he was wealthy, but because he saw her, until he didn't. Callis Sorin didn't come from power, but she knew how to wear it without asking. Her mother was a seamstress from Connecticut. Her hands never stopped moving, even when her eyes were tired. She raised Callis alone, after her father left before she turned 5. Her mother didn't cry about it. She taught Callis how to thread a needle, press a collar, and more importantly, how. To show up to rooms like you belonged there long before anyone offered a seat. Love wasn't about bouquets or grand gestures. It was about showing up when it was inconvenient, about silence that felt safe, about being chosen. She thought Avon understood that. She thought wrong. With Avon, love wasn't explosive. It was quiet, strategic, like him. He didn't flood her with gifts or post her on glossy timelines. But he would cancel a lunch with 3 investors if she texted that she'd had a bad morning. He would send books to her office with notes like, "Page 134, made me think of you." He'd show up at her door on Sunday mornings, no agenda, Just coffee and the kind of silence that made her chest feel full. For 3 years, she held that version of him close. She defended him to friends who said he was too detached. She forgave the slow replies, the forgotten birthdays, the unspoken plans, because she believed he was building something, and that eventually she would be part of it. But tonight, on the 81st floor of Atherton Tower, that illusion collapsed. She was not part of the next chapter. She was the pause between drafts, the rewrite he deleted before the final print. As he walked away toward a glass future made of stock percentages and last names that made investors comfortable, Callis didn't move. She didn't follow. She didn't cry. She didn't whisper his name. She looked at the skyline beyond him, then whispered something only the wind could hear. "You'll know my name. Not because you loved me, but because you lost me." She walked away, and the lights stopped flickering. 3 months before that rooftop night, Callis watched him sleep. They had rented a quiet estate in New Hampshire. No staff, no press, no phones for 2 whole days. Just the fireplace, long walks, and her laughter echoing against his shoulder. As he read her passages from a book she already knew by heart. That night, she made pasta. He didn't comment on the taste. He poured wine instead, touched her wrist in passing, and asked about her mother. He never asked about her family before. She told him her mother stitched wedding dresses for a living, even though she never wore one of her own. She said love had a pattern. If it didn't fit right the first time, you didn't keep adjusting. You started fresh, or you stopped sewing. Avon listened quietly. He traced circles on the table. "I don't believe in perfect fits," he said. "You don't have to," Callis whispered. "You just have to stop undoing the threads." That was the last time he kissed her, like she was more than an option. Callis remembered what came after. That's how she knew it was over before it ended. The phone calls shortened. The warmth in his eyes cooled. He became calculated. She became patient. She told herself it was business, that he was fighting board pressure, battling market shifts, managing an empire. But empires didn't make men forget birthdays, or skip Sunday coffee, or leave 3-word texts where once there were voice notes about favorite rooftops and books that made him cry. They met during a time when Avon was still building, when he still had room to breathe. She reminded him of a time before the names on the merger sheets became louder than his own voice. But reminders aren't always welcome. Sometimes reminders make people feel smaller, and small is something Avon Kyrell refused to feel. When they first met, he didn't care who stared. He pulled her into side streets just to kiss her. He once held her hand during a shareholders' gala. That photo made headlines, not because of her face, but because of what it implied, a man like Avon choosing outside the legacy path. The headlines stopped. So did the hand-holding. It began subtly, a postponed trip, a cancelled dinner, then full silence. When she finally saw him again, it was not by his doing. It was because she showed up. There was a corporate fundraiser for a clean water initiative, something they used to support together. She was invited by her firm. He was the keynote speaker. He didn't greet her. He didn't scan the room for her face. He delivered his speech, thanked sponsors, kissed Halion Vondrell's cheek on the way down from the stage. Halion wore silver, diamonds that sparkled like entitlement. Her smile was polished. Her laugh performed. Her father was the man behind the Pacific Grid, exactly who the Kyrell board needed. That night, Callis didn't wait in the crowd. She walked out halfway through the closing dinner, not because she was weak, but because she refused to be polite about being erased. The next day, her name was no longer listed as the lead analyst on their project. She requested her removal. She told her firm she needed new territory. That's when she requested a meeting with Quince Veer. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Last time they met, Quince had warned her. "You think he's different because he's quiet. But power doesn't come with volume. It comes with decisions." Back then, she had defended Avon, told Quince he didn't know him, told him Avon was loyal in his own way. Now, she stood in Quince's office with no script, no pitch deck, no pretense. "I'm not here to burn him," she said. "I'm here to beat him, Quince had smiled, not because he liked her, but because he respected clarity. They talked numbers. Callis proposed a rebrand of her firm under his umbrella, but with full creative control. He asked what she wanted in return. "Nothing permanent," she said. "Just a runway long enough to show them that choosing bloodlines over brains is bad business." Viacore was born within 8 weeks. Quince funded the expansion. Callis built the team. She picked advisors who'd once been denied tables at Kyrell. She chose marketers who believed in people, not legacy. She didn't market herself as Avon's ex. She let her name stand alone, and slowly it began to echo. Avon noticed. He saw the press, saw the shift in public sentiment, but he didn't reach out. Not then. Not when her firm was profiled in Forbes. Not when she appeared on a panel beside a former Secretary of Energy. Not even when one of his key clients quietly pulled a deal and signed with Viacore instead. But Callis wasn't surprised. Avon didn't believe in returning calls unless they threatened his empire. It was Quince who told her about the investor summit in San Francisco. "You'll be seated 2 chairs from him," Quince said. "I can change the seating if you want." She shook her head. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," she replied. "Especially not the ones I buried myself." The morning of the summit, she wore cream. No loud colors, no statement jewelry, just poise. Her entrance wasn't dramatic, but it was noticed. Avon glanced once. Held it. She returned the look. Unbothered. The panel began. The moderator, smug and curious, tried to stir tension, mentioned past connections, said something about former collaborators turned competitors. Callis smiled, took the mic. "Sometimes people don't choose you because they lack clarity," she said. "And sometimes that's the greatest gift they could ever give you." The room shifted, not with noise, but with understanding. Avon didn't speak for a full minute after that, and when he did, his voice cracked, just once. Later, he caught her in the hallway. "You've changed," he said. She didn't stop walking. "No," she replied. "You did. I just stopped denying it." She didn't wait for his reaction. She entered the elevator. He stood behind the closing doors, unreadable, but she didn't need to read him anymore. She had finally closed the book. She returned to her suite, removed the cream blazer, opened her laptop. There was already an email from Quince. Subject: "Welcome to the next phase." Attachment: Q1 projections. The numbers weren't revenge, they were results. And for the first time in a long time, Callis didn't feel like someone's almost. She felt like someone's answer, and that changed everything. Some people leave quietly, some don't even flinch when they walk away. But silence doesn't mean weakness. Callis didn't chase Avon. She chose herself, and that choice changed everything. If this story made you feel something, do one thing: click like. Then drop a comment with the word unshaken. And if you want more stories where dignity speaks louder than revenge, subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories. Callis Sorin wasn't taught to fight for rooms that refused to open. She was taught to build her own, then invite only the ones who deserved a seat. Her mother, Janora, had iron in her spine and mercy in her eyes. A seamstress who never missed a stitch, even when her hands ached from 12-hour days in the back room of a bridal boutique. Callis watched her pin gowns on women who called her dear but never learned her name. Janora never flinched. She taught her daughter to master 2 things: silence and standards. "Don't shout to be seen," she used to say. "Stand still and let the right ones notice." That's what made Callis different. She didn't grow up in high-rises or marble-tiled foyers. She grew up in a 2-bedroom rental behind a grocery store, where the smell of steamed cloth filled the air before school. Her father left early, too early to leave behind anything but a faded watch and a warning. Janora never mentioned him again. Love, for Callis, became something quiet, earned, intentional, not loud, not messy, not rushed. So when Avon Kyrell first approached her at that gala, she didn't fall for the name. She remembered his eyes, how he scanned the room like he already knew what they'd say, how his gaze stopped on her, not in conquest, but in calculation. He didn't see a moment. He saw a move. Still, She told herself he was different, that the way he pulled away from crowds wasn't arrogance, but protection, that when he said nothing during arguments, it was because he trusted her to understand without explanation. For a while, she did, until the silence stopped feeling like a haven and started feeling like a warning. Before him, her life was simple. She worked as a junior consultant at Amari Tech Solutions, a mid-size sustainability firm that partnered with renewable energy startups across the East Coast. Her job was back-end strategy, no stage lights, no press mentions, just clean numbers and sharper intuition. Her boss, a wiry man named Doran Clay, once told her, "You don't walk in like you're here to play chess. You walk in like you already checkmated the room 2 moves ago." She smiled at that, because she hadn't realized yet that strategy could be a cage too. The months with Avon shifted something. Slowly, subtly. First, her work hours changed. She worked late, then later, then from his penthouse when needed. Then she wasn't needed, not really. Not for opinions, just for presence, for softness, for peace. She started dressing sharper, tighter silhouettes, neutrals, nothing distracting. She no longer pitched ideas at meetings unless asked. And even then, briefly, Avon said, "You balance me." But balance wasn't the same as equity. She realized that when he told her, casually one night after dinner, that his board suggested a long-term partnership with Hallian Vondrell's company would stabilize West Coast expansion. He didn't say Halian's name first. He said, "The board wants a family they can trust beside mine." Callis didn't blink, because she heard the word behind his sentence, bloodline. Her silence made him lean forward. "You okay?" She nodded. "Because what do you say when the man who kissed your forehead 3 nights ago tells you in clean business terms that you're not legacy enough?" He didn't apologize. He didn't comfort her. He simply laid out the plan as if she were a trusted advisor, not the woman who kept his nightmares at bay, who stayed awake through his father's hospital nights, who knew what he looked like before the headlines taught the world to worship him. She knew then. It was already happening. She wasn't in the draft. She wasn't in the next chapter. She was already being written out. So she shifted, quietly. She stopped sleeping over. She stopped answering his texts within minutes. She started saying no. She went back to the gym she used to love. She reconnected with Liana, her old college friend, now running a non-profit tech incubator for women in clean energy. And slowly she remembered how it felt to be valuable, outside of someone else's shadow. The night she cut her hair, just past her shoulders, sleek and neat, was the same night she received an email from a Stanford investor asking if she'd consider consulting for a rising startup focused on solar pipeline infrastructure. She hadn't even sent a resume. Her name had reached them. That moment mattered, because it proved something Avon never said out loud. She was already more than his narrative. She just had to stop letting him edit her. The week of Avon's engagement party, Callis took a weekend trip. She drove north to a small coastal town in Rhode Island where no one knew her, rented a cottage, ate breakfast on the pier, watched couples argue about nothing and smile anyway. She didn't cry. She didn't scroll. She just let herself exist. She wrote in her journal. She sketched. Not business plans, but words she'd forgotten she loved. Soft is not weak. Still is not stuck. And I will not be part of anyone's someday. When she returned to the city, she resigned from Amari Tech. She didn't take another job. She created one. She filed registration for a new entity, Sorin Consulting Group. Just a placeholder name, but it felt like air in her lungs again. Her first client came through Liana, a startup in Arizona needing guidance on cost forecasting. Then another from an old pitch deck she presented 2 years ago. Word spread. She hired 1 assistant, then 3, and then Quince called. He didn't greet her with pleasantries. He said, "I heard Kyrell is shaking." She didn't ask from where. She replied, "Good. He should be." He laughed. "Ready to talk?" She smiled. "I'm free Wednesday." The world thought Callis Sorin had been left behind, but she was simply rerouting, not to prove Avon wrong, but to prove she never needed his permission to be right. Avon had once called her unshakable, but when he said it, it sounded like a compliment laced with caution, as if her steadiness unnerved him. What he never realized was, Callis didn't learn her stillness from peace. She learned it from surviving without guarantees. While he was raised on projections and legacy spreadsheets, she was raised on overtime shifts and late-night budgeting. Callis didn't just know how to build. She knew how to rebuild from nothing. The morning she officially registered her consulting firm, she wore her mother's wedding dress shirt, stitched into a fitted blouse. It still had a faint chalk line from her mother's last project before retirement. She didn't post anything about her launch. No press release, no photo, no dramatic bio, just a new email signature and a quiet determination. Her first client didn't know her past. He was a young founder from Denver, struggling to get his solar tech off the ground. He'd heard from a friend of a friend that she knew how to cut noise, focus funding, and scale lean. She didn't mention Avon, didn't say where she learned investor language, or how she could break down multi-million-dollar pitch decks in one night and point out the lie in the third slide. She simply delivered. In 2 weeks, the founder landed a joint funding round with 2 new partners. In 1 month, he referred her to 5 others. That's how it started. And that's when her phone began ringing again. Investors, startups, legacy firms, not asking if she was Avon's former partner, asking if she was available. One of the board members from Chiral Holdings reached out under a pseudonym. She didn't respond, not because of ego, but because she didn't answer doors she'd already closed. Verecore wasn't in her hands yet, but she could feel the pull of it. It came in waves. One night, around midnight, she sat at her kitchen counter staring at a spreadsheet, one that proved a pattern of silent funding reroutes between Chiral Holdings and a set of proxy firms trying to corner the renewable sector. She highlighted a cell, then 3 more. She didn't plan to act on it, until a memory flashed, Avon laughing once at a question she asked about offshore percentages. "You think like a regulator," he'd said, "not a player." That night, she emailed Quince. He responded within 12 minutes. "Let's meet. Bring the spreadsheet." They met in a neutral suite. No branding, no cameras. Just 2 minds that didn't need small talk. She slid the file across. Quince studied it in silence. "You want to go after him?" he asked. "No," she said. "I want to outperform him." "Same difference," he replied. That was the night the firm name was chosen. Verecore. She didn't ask for equity. Quince didn't offer flowers. Their partnership was forged in mutual focus. He provided the weight of his name. She brought fire with structure. She onboarded 12 key staffers in 6 weeks. A brand strategist from Brazil, a data compliance expert from Ontario, a former product lead from one of Chiral's abandoned projects. Each of them had stories, disregarded, undervalued, talked over. Callis didn't create a firm. She built a redemption table, and no one had to beg for a seat. Their first public debut was at the Clean Grid Alliance event. The keynote was a slot Avon had declined, assuming the event didn't merit his time. Verecore took the spot. Callis stood center stage. She didn't flash credentials. She spoke numbers, and then stories. How her mother sewed dresses for women who never saw the art. How investors often missed founders who didn't fit their mold. How power wasn't about noise, but precision. The crowd gave a standing ovation, not because of theatrics, but because they saw someone who moved like she had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. The next day, 3 media outlets mentioned her name beside Chiral's. Not as an attachment, as competition. Avon didn't call, but he watched. Quince forwarded her the metrics from their press engagement. Engagement had jumped 27%. Searches for Verecore Sorin were trending upward. Still, Callis didn't gloat. She met her team for lunch. She celebrated their first client renewal. She sent her mother a text. "We're in the papers. You'd have fixed my collar, though." Her mother replied with one word: "Always." That night, Avon's name trended again. Not because of a win, because of a question. An industry insider leaked a snippet from a closed-door board discussion at Kyrell. The topic, reputation drift. The quote, "We're losing to someone we thought would never compete." Callies didn't share the article, but she clipped the line and wrote it in her journal. Underneath it, she scribbled, "I never wanted to compete. I wanted to be free. Your mistake was giving me both." Avon Kyrell sat across from Harlien Vondrel in a private lounge above Central Park, sipping scotch he didn't taste. She laughed at something on her phone, some tweet about green energy becoming the new oil. He forced a chuckle. This was the woman the board approved of, the daughter of Jeroen Vondrel, whose energy monopoly stretched across the Pacific coast like steel wires in ocean mist. Her family brought legacy, stability, old money dressed in modern politics, and none of it felt like oxygen. Halien looked at him mid-laugh. "You good?" He nodded, adjusting his cufflink, the chiral crest glinting under chandelier light. "You haven't said much." "Thinking," he replied. "Dangerous." She smirked, leaning back. She was poised, beautiful, sharp. Everything a corporate future demanded, everything Callis never tried to be. And that was the problem. Callis had been his edge, his soft armor, the voice that didn't echo the board, didn't worship his name, didn't shrink when he shut down. She gave him peace. Halien gave him position. 2 nights before this dinner, Avon stood in front of a full boardroom of Kyrell Holdings. 12 men, 2 women, all watching him discuss the next quarter's global expansion. When he mentioned a potential Vondrel-Kyrell alliance, the silence was immediate. Then a nod. Then 2 more. "Make it permanent," someone said. "Strengthen the name," another added. Avon knew what that meant. Marry her. They wouldn't say it directly, but everyone in the room understood. Legacy doesn't move without loyalty. And loyalty, in their world, was only as strong as your alliances. He didn't flinch when they said it. He didn't defend Callis, not because she wasn't worth defending, but because in that moment, surrounded by empire, fear sounded a lot like strategy. He had left that meeting with a signed roadmap. 6 months. 1 engagement. 1 expansion. And his name would go from relevant to unshakable. At the cost of silence. At the cost of her. The press release was crafted carefully. Words like visionary, growth-focused, next era. Avon's quote was deliberate. "We're building something that will last." He didn't mention Halien's name directly, but the photo said enough. 1 hand on her back, champagne glass in the other, smile not too wide, eyes not too soft. Callis wasn't in the photo, but her absence was the loudest part of the image. When the release hit, Halien texted him, "Told you I'd look good on your arm." He didn't reply. He stared at the screen until it dimmed, then called his assistant and asked for the afternoon off. He didn't go home. He walked for 2 hours. No security, no driver, just his shadow stretching between glass towers and strangers who didn't stop to notice him. He thought of her, of how she would have called the quote lazy, of how she would have made him rewrite it. "Legacy without language is empty," she once said. At the time, he'd told her she was too poetic for corporate life. She smiled like that was a compliment. Avon didn't realize he missed her voice until he heard silence that wasn't hers. At the same time that press release hit national outlets, Callis was, in a strategy meeting in a borrowed co-working space in Boston. No marble, no skyline, just whiteboards, half-drunk coffee cups, and 3 team leads waiting on her cue. She didn't mention the article. She didn't blink when one of the interns awkwardly minimized a tab that had Avon's engagement photo on it. She simply pointed to the numbers. "This margin's bleeding," she said. "Fix it or cut the service." That was it. No breakdown, no confession, only business. Because if Avon had taught her anything, it was how to separate pain from performance. That evening, she didn't go home. She booked a 1-night stay in a quiet hotel by the water. No calls, no friends, no distractions, just the sound of waves and a blank journal. She wrote nothing for hours. Then, 1 line. "He built for power, I built for peace." but I will win both. She slept without tears. She didn't dream of him. Not anymore. Because somewhere deep down she finally understood. Avon didn't betray her because he stopped loving her. He betrayed her because he was too scared to be the man she already saw in him. And now he would spend a lifetime proving something to people who never really cared, while she built something for people who would never forget her name. Avon knew how to read numbers before he learned how to read people. And even now, the numbers made more sense. Hayleen's presence added 12% confidence to the board's investor modeling. Her family's pipeline connections guaranteed infrastructure in states Kyril had been chasing. For 5 years, she made sense on paper. She came with clean lines, no history, no emotional backstory to navigate. Callis came with roots, with opinions, with quiet fire he never learned how to handle. Haylien never asked where he'd been. Callis always noticed when his silence lasted too long. At first, it felt like freedom. Then it felt like noise. But by the time he realized the difference, Callis had already disappeared. She didn't block his number. She didn't lash out. She didn't call his assistant demanding answers. She simply vanished from every part of his rhythm. He noticed it in the way no one questioned him anymore. There were no quiet nudges when he ignored nuance. No second thoughts when he signed off on proposals that, months ago, Callis would have challenged. No reminders that growth at the cost of conscience wasn't growth at all. She used to be his mirror. Now he shaved in front of glass that only reflected surface. Haylien brought access. Callis brought accuracy. And he chose the one that looked better in front of cameras. One night, after a formal dinner at the Vondrell estate, Avon sat alone in the car. The driver waited for his command, but Avon didn't speak. Instead, he opened the browser on his phone and typed Sorin Consulting Group. He hadn't searched her name in months, not because he forgot her, but because he couldn't afford to remember. The site was sleek, minimalist, no photos, no buzzwords, just 5 client logos, 3 words: precision, integrity, transformation. He clicked the latest article linked at the bottom. Emerging forces in renewable innovation. There she was. Not in the headline, but in the quotes. Power doesn't come from control, it comes from clarity. If we don't understand the communities we serve, we're not building, we're invading. That was her. He didn't need a byline to know it. She always said things like that. Unpolished, unfiltered, unignorable. The kind of words that make men like him uncomfortable. The kind of words that change industries. He closed the tab, told the driver to go home. But his mind stayed in that quote the entire ride. Callis didn't read the press anymore. Not because she didn't care, but because her energy was finite, and he didn't deserve space in it. She had just landed her 5th retained client, a government-backed project focused on inner-city solar grid testing in Baltimore. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered, and these days she only chased what mattered. Her team had grown. 14 full-time staffers, a satellite office in Chicago, a pipeline of clients that no longer asked who she used to work with, because now she was the name on their lips. But even with all of it, there were nights she couldn't sleep. Not because of regret, but because of memory, because love like that doesn't vanish. It mutates. Sometimes it turns into motivation, sometimes into silence, sometimes into a lump in your throat when no one's watching. On those nights, she'd walk to her balcony, glass of water in hand, and breathe. She didn't journal anymore. She didn't need to. Every contract she signed was a paragraph of closure, every milestone a sentence in her new story. She didn't want him back, but she wanted him to feel the absence. And based on the growing whispers across their shared industry, he did. At a gala event in Los Angeles, a female journalist from an eco-finance magazine leaned across her table toward Avon. "Is it true you passed on Sorin Consulting for your Nevada project?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I didn't pass. Our scope changed." The journalist nodded slowly, then smiled. "She's impressive. People listened to her." Avon raised his glass, smiled politely, and changed the subject. But her words followed him through the night like perfume. People listened to her, and for once, he wasn't one of them. He asked his assistant to clear the rest of the week's media engagements. He said he needed space, but what he really needed was to remember how to breathe without legacy pressing on his lungs. Back in New York, Kailis hosted a roundtable for black women in renewable energy. No cameras, no sponsors, just real voices, real obstacles, real solutions. One woman, young and nervous, said she almost quit last year because she was tired of being invisible in plain sight. Kailis didn't flinch. She leaned forward. "Let them underestimate you," she said. "That's your opening." That phrase circled the room like fire. Later that night, as the group hugged goodbye, one woman whispered, "You don't even know what you just gave us." Kailis smiled. "I do," she said softly, "because someone once made me feel invisible too." She didn't name him. She didn't have to, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy, the kind that doesn't need last names to matter, the kind that grows in rooms that never asked for your silence, the kind that doesn't break when someone else walks away. It only grows louder, and deeper, and stronger. Quince Vere didn't smile easily, but the moment Kailis walked into his office, something flickered in his eyes, recognition or curiosity, maybe both. It had been over a year since they'd last spoken. Back then, he'd warned her. Avon doesn't build partnerships, he absorbs them. And when he's done, there's nothing left but the shape he wanted you to be. She hadn't listened. She had defended Avon, softly but firmly, told Quince he was different. Now, she walked into Quince's office without a hint of that softness, not because she was cold, but because she was clear. "I'm not here to ruin him," she said, placing the file on the glass table between them. "I want to make him irrelevant." Quince raised an eyebrow. "Not personal." "Never again," Kailis replied. He tapped the file. "You sure about this path?" "I'm not here to play the victim," she said. "I'm here to build the firm he wouldn't have survived without, only now it won't need him to shine." That's how the partnership began. No contracts that night. No champagne, no promises, just clarity and leverage. Vere Corps wasn't born with fireworks. It started with a shared document. 3 bullet points: purpose, problem, plan. Kailis handled the strategy, branding, and team building. Quince handled funding, legal structuring, and protecting the foundation from corporate espionage, because in their world, success didn't just attract praise. It attracted surveillance. Kailis didn't want her name in lights. She wanted her name in the right rooms. She recruited intentionally. People who had been passed over for being too bold in meetings. Women with PhDs who couldn't get past junior associate roles because they had natural hair or accents. Men who left legacy firms after realizing they were only tolerated until quarterly reviews. She didn't ask for stories. She recognized the look. The quiet resilience of people who had survived polite rejection their whole careers. They operated lean at first. 3 full-time staff, 2 advisors, 1 relentless strategist who refused to let momentum slip. Kailis didn't sleep more than 5 hours a night. She woke before sunrise, reviewed contracts, rewrote briefs, rehearsed pitches alone in her mirror. Not because she doubted herself, but because preparation was her form of protection. She built a code into the culture of Vere Corps. We don't wait for validation. We build proof. The first contract came from a Midwestern city council trying to convert outdated power lines into renewable grids. The budget was modest, but the visibility wasn't. Kailis led the pitch. Quince stayed in the background. When the council asked about her last firm, she simply said, "We chose impact over image." The deal closed in 4 days. By month 2, they'd secured their second client, a private research facility testing hybrid solar turbines. By month 4, an international conglomerate quietly approached them for consultation on policy navigation across green tech markets. No press releases, no interviews, just results. Quince watched her work, not like a partner, like a strategist assessing a wild card. "Why him?" he asked one night. They were in the office late, reviewing next quarter projections. Why Avon? She didn't flinch, because he listened before anyone else did, and because I thought that meant something. Quince didn't respond immediately. Then he said, and Callis leaned back, arms folded. Now, I listened to myself. He nodded once. That's dangerous. She tilted her head. For who? He smirked. We're about to find out. Their first major breakthrough came via an industry panel in San Francisco. Avon was supposed to headline. He declined last minute. No reason given. The committee offered the slot to Billionaire. Quince wanted her to send someone else. But Callis accepted it herself, not out of ego, but because the room deserved to hear a voice it had ignored too long. The night before the panel, she stood in her hotel suite, staring at her note cards. She didn't wear a power color. She chose navy. Simple, clean, no frills, no statement earrings, no softening of her presence. She wasn't there to dazzle. She was there to declare. The next morning, when she stepped onto the stage, the air shifted, not because of applause, because of energy. She spoke about transparency in energy reform. She spoke about communities being treated like variables instead of people. And then, without naming names, she said, power built on silence is brittle. Legacy without accountability is noise dressed as structure. The crowd went still. She didn't smile. She didn't soften the edges. She just finished her speech, thanked the panel, and stepped off stage. No media rush. No handshakes she didn't want. Only one quiet moment of breathing behind the curtain before she walked into the next meeting. Quince met her backstage. You're officially dangerous now, he said. Good, she replied. That's how you know they're paying attention. Later that night, Callis received a text from an unknown number. You looked good up there. Not just good, strong. She read it once, deleted it, then opened her laptop and got back to work. Because she didn't need his compliments. She had earned her own power. And this time, it wasn't leaving with anyone's name on it but hers. After San Francisco, the energy shifted. Not in headlines, not in boardrooms, but in murmurs, inside back channels, investor brunches, VC group chats. Everyone wanted to know, who's behind Billionaire? Some already knew. Others pretended not to. But the momentum wasn't about scandal. It wasn't about Callis's past with Avon. It was about results. The projections Billionaire submitted to the World Clean Energy Forum were nearly flawless. Leaner margins, smarter infrastructure integrations, community-first budgeting. Solutions that the older firms had failed to produce in 2 decades of trying. And unlike Avon's team, which focused on large-scale contracts tied to corporate utility takeovers, Billionaire was becoming known for something dangerous: public trust. People believed in Callis. They didn't know everything about her, but they knew she didn't speak like a brand. She spoke like someone who'd been overlooked and decided to never let that happen again. Quince noticed it too. At their third quarter briefing, he slid a folder across the table. You've got 5 board seats waiting to be filled, he said. 2 are watching. 1 already wants to fund you without even seeing your roadmap. Callis didn't smile. She flipped open the folder, scanned the names, and said, I only want people who've built from the ground. No legacy seats. No figureheads. Quince laughed. You really mean to win? I don't want to win, she said. I want him to hear my name in every room he used to own. He nodded. That's what makes you more dangerous than him. You're not trying to protect a legacy. You're building one. Avon knew it the moment his junior strategist forwarded him an investor trend report that featured Billionaire's second quarter performance on page 1. They had doubled their projections, launched 2 pilot programs in under 6 months. One of those pilots replaced a contract Chiral had been pursuing for 3 years. He didn't speak when he read it. He didn't send the usual follow-up. He just sat in his corner office, the city blinking behind him, and replayed Callis's last real words to him in his mind. You thought I was a chapter when I was the whole book. He hadn't believed it then. Now. It was the only sentence that echoed. His phone buzzed with a new email, an internal one. Subject line, urgent, PR consideration. Attached, a memo suggesting Kyrell reframe its strategy narrative due to Viacor's rising media positioning. He read it 3 times. The final line hit hardest. Media trend indicates a shift in trust toward firms with narrative ownership, not just infrastructure ownership. Narrative ownership. That used to be him. Now it was her. Meanwhile, Callis's office buzzed quietly with new activity. The expansion into DC was underway. She didn't hire fast. She hired intentionally. 3 of her newest hires were women who'd all been passed over for promotions at firms that touted equity but practiced none. She didn't bring it up in interviews. She simply asked them what they were tired of explaining. One said, "My tone." Another, "My ambition." The third whispered, "Why I know more than my boss." Callis hired all 3 on the spot. "We don't reward silence here," she told them. "We reward clarity." That same week, she was invited to speak at a closed-door roundtable for green innovation leadership. Only 20 firms were invited. Kyrell Holdings was one of them. She almost declined, but she didn't. Not because she wanted to see Avon, but because her team deserved to sit at that table, and this time at equal height. When she arrived, she didn't wear navy or cream. She wore black, fitted, clean, intentional. No accessories, no softness, just presence. She walked into the conference room with her project manager and legal lead. Avon was already seated. He looked up. For a second, he froze. No one else noticed, but she did. She nodded once. No smile. He gave the slightest nod back. Then the meeting began. The agenda was dry at first. Policy updates, funding trends, international forecasting. But when the floor opened for insights on next-gen infrastructure partnerships, the moderator called on Avon. He paused. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Our challenge isn't speed, it's sincerity. Consumers don't just want products, they want proof. And for too long, legacy firms assumed our name was enough. It's not anymore." It wasn't a concession, but it was close. When it came time for Callis to speak, she didn't retaliate. She didn't draw comparisons. She simply said, "If your power structure excludes people who keep your systems running, you don't have power. You have performance." The room went still again. But this time, it wasn't tension. It was truth. After the session, she packed up her things quickly. She didn't plan to linger. But as she turned to leave, she saw Avon waiting near the door. He didn't block her path. He simply said, "You made it uncomfortable in there." She looked him dead in the eyes. "And?" He shrugged. "It needed to be." She gave a faint nod. "Then don't waste it." She walked past him without another word. And he didn't follow, because this time even he knew. Callis didn't need to be chosen anymore. She had chosen herself, and that choice was loud enough to shake the legacy he once thought was untouchable. The ballroom wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. The annual Pacific Energy Consortium Summit had never relied on glamour. What mattered were the names on the invitation list, and who chose to attend in silence. For years, Kyrell Holdings had owned the keynote slot, but this year, Avon declined. On paper, it was a scheduling conflict. In truth, he didn't want to be seated beside Callis Sorin, because now, she wasn't a guest, she was a headline. Viacor was the surprise star of the summit, and Callis had been asked to join. A policy impact panel alongside 3 other CEOs and 1 government liaison. Her name had been printed first in the panel announcement, not because of favoritism, because her please reply came in before Avon's did, and in the world of power optics, sequence mattered. Avon still showed up, quietly, late, with his tie loosened like he wasn't trying. But she saw through it. The room was circular, with low lighting and long tables. Everyone wore neutral. Everyone spoke in calm terms. Until she did. When the moderator asked about community trust, she said, "Trust doesn't come from your press team. It comes from your track record. And if the only time communities hear from you is during a product launch, you're not leading. You're exploiting. Someone across the room coughed. Avon didn't. He kept his eyes fixed on her, still, sharp, unreadable. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The moderator shifted. Ms. Sorin, that's a strong statement. Would you say legacy firms have failed in that regard? She let the silence stretch, then answered, legacy firms haven't failed. They've evolved into mirrors. They reflect whoever's funding them. The danger is when reflection replaces responsibility. That line wasn't rehearsed. It came from the part of her that remembered sitting in rooms just like this one, 3 years ago, next to Avon, holding her tongue to keep his reputation smooth. She wasn't smoothing anything now. She was carving space. When the panel ended, polite applause filled the room. Nothing wild, nothing uncomfortable. But the difference was clear. People weren't clapping out of routine. They were clapping because something had shifted. Because for the first time in that room, someone had said what everyone else knew but was too strategic to admit. Avon didn't approach her during the break, not because he wasn't tempted, but because he wasn't sure if she would even stop. He watched from across the room as 2 women from the Department of Energy leaned into Kalis's orbit, smiling, taking notes, asking questions. She didn't perform. She didn't pitch. She simply answered like a woman who no longer had to prove she belonged. He remembered when she first entered that space, years ago, in Los Angeles, nervous about her, talking points, and whether the room would listen to someone without a last name tied to oil. She had asked him, "Should I smile more when I speak?" He had said, "Smile when you mean it. Don't soften the truth." He didn't know that was the last time she would ask him how to enter a room. Now she owned the entire space, and he stood across from it, no longer invited into the gravity she carried. Later that night, Kalis returned to her hotel room. She peeled off her blazer, set her notes aside, and exhaled. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. She poured a glass of water, kicked off her shoes, checked her phone once, no new messages worth answering, then sat down with her journal. She hadn't written since the Vera Core rebrand, but tonight demanded reflection. Not because of what Avon did, but because of what she didn't feel anymore. She wrote, "He looked like a memory, not a mistake, not a ghost, just a paragraph I already finished reading." Avon, on the other hand, didn't sleep. He sat at the bar of the hotel where the summit was hosted, his drink untouched. He'd received 4 texts about Kalis's panel, 2 from investors, 1 from a board member, 1 from a journalist who asked, "Do you miss being the voice in the room?" He hadn't replied, because the truth was heavier than a text could carry. He didn't miss being the voice. He missed being understood. And that had only ever come from one person, the one who no longer asked for space, because she had taken it. And he knew, deeply, undeniably, that no merger, no contract, no press campaign would ever give him back what he lost. She wasn't just the woman who once loved him. She was now the standard that measured how far he had fallen. The article came out 3 days later. It wasn't a cover story. Just a mid-column piece in a respected industry journal with one quiet headline. She didn't shout. She shifted the room. The subheading read, "How Kalis Sorin challenged every executive in the room without naming a single one." The article didn't reference Avon. It didn't have to. His name wasn't needed to tell the story anymore. That was the part that stung. For years, Avon had been used to his name leading the room. Investors followed it. Partners trusted it. Competitors feared it. Now, someone he once considered his calm was becoming the center of the industry's most powerful conversations, and she was doing it without noise. He watched as LinkedIn filled with quiet praise. Not viral posts, but respect, measured, controlled, certain. Kalis Sorin said what needed to be said. Full stop. New standard. Old rooms. She doesn't need power language. She uses truth. He didn't forward the article to anyone. He didn't reply to the board member who messaged him, "She's become the voice we needed from you." He simply shut his laptop and sat in silence, not in thought. In realization, he had let the one person go who never needed to be told what to be, because she already knew. And he had chosen the one the board approved of, not the one who made him think harder. Meanwhile, Kaylis didn't read the article until a team member brought it to her. She read it once, then folded it quietly and tucked it into her drawer. No smile, no pride, just acknowledgement, because she hadn't gone there to be quoted. She had gone there to be undeniable, and that was happening, not because of one panel, but because of every decision that followed it. Her phone rang the next morning. It was a woman from the Department of Energy. "We'd like to bring Viacor into the design conversation for the federal urban grid overhaul," she said. Kaylis asked for the timeline. 3 weeks. She asked for the names at the table. 10 men, 2 women, 1 open chair. "And we'd like that chair to be yours." Kaylis didn't blink. She said, "Email me the framework. I'll review with my team." That was it. Not a moment of hesitation, not a whisper of needing to prove herself. Because now, she wasn't chasing inclusion. She was being asked to lead it. Across the city, Avon sat in his quarterly board review. His numbers weren't weak. Kyrell was still strong on paper. But the boardroom wasn't as quiet as usual. Questions came faster now. Why are we trailing in the Southwest market? Why are your retention numbers down in the mid-level ranks? What's the hold-up with the Nevada pivot? They weren't blaming him outright, but they were measuring him, comparing him. And Avon knew who they were comparing him to, because one board member didn't even hide it. "She's everywhere these days." He didn't say her name, but the emphasis was deliberate. Avon adjusted his cuff, looked at the chart, and gave a calm answer about market timing and capital shifts. It was enough to move the meeting forward, but it didn't erase the reality. He was no longer the future. He was the name the future was trying to escape. That night, he stood outside her building. No driver, no press, just him in a black coat, collar turned up, a folder in hand. He didn't expect her to let him in, but she did. She didn't look surprised. She didn't smile. She stepped aside, let him walk into the quiet warmth of her foyer, and waited. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "Good," she replied, "because I don't give things away anymore." He nodded once, then held out the folder. "Your policy brief from the summit. I think your final section was left out of the packet." She took it, checked it, and said, "You didn't need to bring this yourself." "I know." A beat of silence. Then, finally, he spoke again. "I watched the panel. I listened." Kaylis looked up. "You were in the room?" "No. I watched the recording." Another beat. "You didn't blink once." "That's because I wasn't performing," she said. "I was done waiting for permission." He took a slow breath. "I'm not going to ask for another chance." "You shouldn't," she said. "But I needed to say something." She folded her arms, listening. "I chose what looked like power," he said. "But what you carry, it's something else." "What is it, Avon?" "Presence," he swallowed. "And I didn't know how to stand beside that. I was afraid I'd fade." Her voice didn't soften. "Then you were never built to lead." He nodded. Not hurt, not defensive, just honest. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You don't get to say that." He held her gaze. "You're right." She opened the door. He stepped out, didn't look back. She didn't close the door until he disappeared down the street. When she did, she didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She walked to her kitchen, made tea, and opened her laptop. 3 new emails waited, all from people who didn't care who she used to love, only what she stood for now. It's a shift. Kaylis didn't argue. She didn't reclaim him. She reclaimed herself. He watched from the sidelines as the woman he once loved became the standard he couldn't match. If you've ever been the one they doubted, if you've ever had to walk away just to be heard, then like this video. Comment with the word unmatched. And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more powerful tales where quiet strength rewrites every ending. The invitation wasn't romantic. It was a plain text, no emojis, no punctuation, typical Avon. "Dinner tomorrow night. Just us. If you're free." Callie stared at the message for 3 minutes before she replied. "Where?" "Fifth and Mercer. Upstairs. The private room." She didn't ask who made the reservation. She didn't dress for seduction. She dressed in black. High neckline, hair pulled back. Simple, composed, prepared. The kind of look that made it clear she wasn't there for closure. She was there for control. When she walked into the private library above the restaurant, the maitre d' didn't ask for her name. He simply nodded and led her to a quiet room with tall shelves, warm wood, and a table set for two. Avon stood as she entered. No handshake, no cheek kiss. Just a quiet, "You look well." She nodded once. "I am." He gestured to the seat. She sat. A bottle of wine sat uncorked in the center of the table. "I ordered the one you used to like," he said. "I don't drink wine anymore," she replied. He blinked once, recovered quickly. "Water." "Fine." The silence stretched between them, not hostile, but heavy. He broke it first. "I was scared." She raised an eyebrow. "That's the opening?" He nodded. "I don't have anything clever." She folded her hands. "Then say what you need to say." He swallowed. "I was scared because you saw me too clearly. You knew what I was before I became what the world expects. You knew I wasn't finished yet. And that frightened you?" "No, it exposed me." Her face didn't soften. He went on. "I chose Haley because she made things easier. The board liked her. The headlines were clean. The projections worked. There were no expectations outside of the script." He paused. "With you, nothing was scripted. You challenged me. You forced me to think harder. And when it got loud around me, I didn't want to feel like I had to earn my peace. So, you picked someone who wouldn't ask questions," Callis said. He nodded. She leaned forward. "You could have told me. You could have said you weren't ready. I might have even understood." Avon looked down. "I didn't have the words." She shook her head slightly. "No, you didn't have the courage." Silence again. This time, it sat between them like a third guest at the table, unnamed but undeniable. He tried again. "I didn't think I'd get another chance to say this." "You don't," she said quietly. "But I'll let you finish." Avon looked at her. Really looked. "You were the love of my life, Callis." She didn't flinch. "You were the one who believed in me before I had the numbers to back it. You gave me a version of myself I was too immature to hold on to. And you never asked me to be perfect. Just honest." She stared at him. "You thought I was a chapter," she said slowly. "But I was the whole book." He nodded. His throat moved, but no words came. "I'm not angry," she added. "Not anymore." "Then what are you?" She took her time with that answer. "I'm done." She stood. He didn't try to stop her. She picked up her coat. "You chose power," she said softly. "So did I." And with that, she left. No hug, no tears, no backward glance. Just the sound of her heels disappearing down the hall. Avon stayed at the table for 15 more minutes. Alone. With a wine neither of them drank. Because he realized in that moment he had lost her. Not because of another man, not because of timing, but because the woman who once loved him had built a life where his name no longer echoed. Not in memory, not in regret, not even in triumph. She didn't need him to be wrong to prove she was right. She had simply become undeniable. Callis didn't go home that night. She walked. No phone in her hand, no playlist, no destination, just her breath, steady. Her thoughts, quiet. Her heels echoing against the concrete of a city that no longer overwhelmed her. She passed storefronts closing for the evening. Couples lingering in the yellow glow of dinner lights. A boy spinning in circles while his mother begged him to stop. She didn't cry. There was nothing left to release. He'd said what she already knew. He'd admitted what she had learned to live with. She wasn't the regret. She was the reminder, and reminders didn't beg to be remembered. They lived in the contrast between who someone became and who they could have been. She reached the corner of her block before she paused. In the distance, her building lights glowed. Safe. Still. Hers. Inside, a folder waited, detailing the final phase of the DC urban grid proposal. Tomorrow, she'd meet with 3 government leaders who no longer introduced her as the woman who used to date Kyrell. Now, she was the one people prepared to speak to. They rehearsed for her, not because of fear, but because of respect. She keyed into her unit and stepped into the calm. No music, no television, just the quiet power of a woman at peace. She hung her coat, poured a glass of cold water, and sat on the edge of her couch. She opened her laptop, checked her calendar, skimmed her notes, then leaned back. For a long time, she stared at the ceiling, not in sadness, but in recognition of how far she'd come, of how far she still intended to go, and of how right she had been to stop proving her worth to people who couldn't see past their own insecurity. Across town, Avon didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, the city buzzing below. Halion had flown to DC earlier that day. Some gala, some speech. He hadn't asked. She hadn't offered details. They didn't argue. They didn't touch. They simply coexisted now. He thought of the dinner again, the way Callis never raised her voice, never demanded apologies, never sought acknowledgement. She didn't need closure. She had already closed the chapter on her own terms. He rolled over, opened his phone, and pulled up her company website. He read the team bios, the community impact page, the mission statement she wrote herself. Power is not in domination. It's in clarity, precision, and building systems that don't collapse when one person leaves. He exhaled, slowly. That line wasn't about him, not directly, but it echoed, because once she had been his system, his pause, his perspective, and now she was the future he no longer had access to. The next morning, Callis stood in front of a whiteboard with her senior team. The DC project was in motion. There were zoning challenges, budget negotiations, and timelines that would require overtime. But she was energized, not because of the workload, because of the meaning. One of her analysts pointed to a block on the map. "We're going to get pushback here," she said. "Old money, old zoning." Callis nodded. "Then we don't push. We prove." Her strategist smiled. "You always say that." Callis turned to the team. "When you've been underestimated, your greatest asset isn't force, it's discipline. Let them expect noise. We'll give them results." They got to work. No one in that room cared about her last name, or who she used to be seen beside. They cared about the vision, the numbers, the outcome. She had replaced proximity to power with power itself, and she'd done it quietly. No interviews about betrayal, no staged comebacks, no revenge headlines, just execution. Later that week, she received a message, not from Avon, from someone on his board. Short, polite. "Would you be open to consulting with Kyrell Holdings on upcoming grid transitions? We're impressed with your projections. Name your rate." Callis read it twice, then closed her laptop. She didn't respond, because some tables you don't return to, not even to prove a point, not even to show them who you became. Some tables taught you everything you needed to know by refusing to see your worth the first time. She didn't forward the email to Quince, didn't discuss it in her staff meeting, didn't even mention it to her mother, because power didn't need to announce itself. It simply continued. She picked up her pen, returned to her meeting notes, and moved forward. By spring, Veercore was no longer the rising firm. It was the benchmark. Cities were calling them before they called legacy firms. Private equity funds were requesting meetings, not to pitch deals but to learn how they scaled community-focused infrastructure without bloated overheads. News anchors stopped calling her a female founder. They called her what she was, a leader. Callis didn't adjust to fame. She deflected it. Interviews were short. Profiles were rare. She declined 3 magazine covers because she didn't need her face on the front page. She needed her impact on the grid. One reporter asked, "Why don't you take more credit?" Callis replied simply, "I take results." Her team had grown to 28 full-time staff. 2 satellite offices were under development. Their Baltimore pilot, once considered a long shot, had exceeded every energy retention benchmark by 31%. And every time someone tried to link her to Avon Chiral in a write-up or casual reference, her team corrected it. She's the CEO of Veer Core, they'd say. Not someone's ex. Someone's example. Quince watched it all unfold with a rare type of satisfaction. Not pride. He wasn't sentimental like that. But respect. He once told her, most people want revenge. You didn't. You wanted presence. Now she had both. One night, after a meeting, he lingered outside her office. You ever think about what would have happened if he hadn't picked her? Callis didn't lift her eyes from her screen. I would have stayed longer than I should have. Quince nodded. Funny, he said. Sometimes the worst decisions made about us free us. She finally looked up. Or expose what we already knew. They didn't talk about Avon after that. There was no need. That same month, Avon sat in a quarterly strategy meeting that felt colder than usual. Chiral Holdings was still profitable, but the energy had changed. Younger board members were more vocal. Their questions were sharper, their comparisons less subtle. One even asked, "What's our Veer Core response?" Avon held his jaw tight. "There's no response. They're not our model. They're a different sector." But that wasn't true. Not anymore. Because city after city was choosing them over Chiral. Not because of price, because of trust. And trust couldn't be bought back once it was lost. Especially when it was lost to someone who never needed you to validate it in the first place. Avon left that meeting with a familiar weight in his chest. But this time, it didn't come with anger. It came with understanding. Callis hadn't tried to destroy his empire. She'd simply built something so strong, his stopped looking like the only option. Meanwhile, she walked into every room now with a posture that required no explanation. At a Harvard panel, she spoke to a room of graduate students about ethical power. Someone asked, "What would you say to women who feel they have to choose between love and leadership?" Callis paused, then said, "Don't chase spaces that make you choose. Love that fears your growth isn't love. It's management." The room was quiet for a beat. Then a student whispered, "I needed that." Callis nodded. She didn't elaborate. Because truth doesn't need decoration. It just needs courage. After the panel, a young man approached her. "I followed your work since Baltimore. Thank you for showing us another way." She smiled. "I didn't invent the way. I just stopped waiting for a map." Later that evening, in her hotel suite, she received a message from a woman she hadn't spoken to in over a year. Haylene. The text was brief. "I know you don't owe me a word, but I walked away. You were right. I thought I'd win, but I lost too. Just thank you. For what you didn't say, I heard it anyway." Callis didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because some things don't require conversation. They require distance and growth. She put her phone away, pulled open her laptop, and kept building the only empire that mattered, one made of principles, not permission. Kaylee stood on the rooftop of Veer Core's new DC headquarters, watching her team arrive one by one. There were no photographers, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no paid applause. Just her people, engineers, policy experts, young architects, grid specialists. Each one had once been overlooked. Now they walked through the doors of a company that was shaping the future because she gave them a chance to be seen. The building wasn't flashy, but it was functional. Solar panels, green-certified interiors, community labs on the ground floor. No glass walls to intimidate, no corner offices meant to divide. Everything was designed around clarity. She took a breath and stepped inside. Her assistant, Mayra, handed her the final briefing folder for the U.S. Infrastructure Accountability Forum. She'd be speaking in 3 days. "You're the only private founder on the schedule," Mayra said. Callis nodded. "That's because we didn't wait for a seat. We earned the microphone." Mayra smiled. "They're expecting Polish. They'll get presents." That same day, Avon received a call from his former legal strategist. The woman sounded tense. "City of Oakland just pulled out of our proposal. They cited Veerkor's community guarantees as a reason. Avon closed his eyes. Is it official? Letter came this morning. He didn't respond. The strategist hesitated. Do you want me to reach out to them? No, Avon said. They've already made their decision. He ended the call. For the first time, he felt something deeper than loss. It was the weight of seeing someone you once had shape the world you only thought you controlled. He opened his drawer, pulled out a folded paper. The press page from 6 months ago, Veerkor overtakes Kyrell in Midwest urban contracts. He had kept it, not to mock, to remember, not who she was, who he could have been beside her. Callis stood at the center of her war room with a marker in hand. The team surrounded a wall of live data displays, city maps, and forecast models. They were prepping for the next 5-year proposal, a multi-state green corridor that would change everything. It has to work in the places the big firms gave up on, she said. Someone asked, what about cost caps? She nodded. We'll lead with equity-first models, give people options they've never had, and we'll prove that trust doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be earned. She didn't quote a mission statement. She didn't mention competition, because she wasn't chasing anymore. She was designing what she never had, a legacy of dignity, a map for builders like her, a system where no one had to shrink to be included. That night, she walked through the corridors of the nearly finished Chicago hub. Lights dimmed, floor plans scattered. It felt like a new chapter already breathing. Quince was there. He leaned against the glass, coffee in hand. You know what I realized today? He said. She glanced at him. What? I haven't thought about Kyrell once this week. Callis smiled, but didn't gloat. That's how you know we're not reacting anymore, she said. We're leading. Quince nodded. You ever think about what would have happened if he didn't choose her? She paused, her gaze steady. I would have stayed smaller. And for the first time, she said it without bitterness. Just truth. In his office across the city, Avon scrolled through a news article that compared Veerkor's model with Kyrell's. The final line stood out. Where Kyrell relies on reach, Veerkor thrives on trust. One expands, the other leads. He closed the article. For the first time, he didn't feel insulted. He felt relieved, because maybe she was never meant to fit in his world. She was meant to outgrow it. And he was meant to remember her name, not because she loved him once, but because she stopped needing him completely. Callis was just about to lock up her office when she saw him standing in the lobby. No entourage, no security, no polished assistant tapping a tablet behind him. Just Avon, alone. She stood still, hand resting on the doorframe, heart calm. He didn't move until she took 2 steps closer. I don't want anything, he said. She folded her arms. Good, because I don't owe anything. His gaze didn't drop. I know. The air between them felt sharper now, not tense, just cleaner, like the clutter had been cleared away, and what remained was truth. How did you get in? She asked. The guard remembered me. Of course he did. People still recognized the name. But not because it held weight in her world, because it used to. Why are you here? She asked. He hesitated. Then, because I finally understand. She didn't respond. Not because she needed more, but because she didn't expect anything else from him. He continued. You weren't peace, Callis. You were presence, and I mistook your steadiness for something I didn't have to work for. She blinked once. And now, I know better. He looked around the lobby. You built something I never could. Not because I didn't have the resources, but because I didn't have the courage. Her voice was steady. No, you had it. You just gave it away. He nodded. There was no defense left in him. No pitch, no excuses. Only recognition. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, he added. And I'm definitely not here to ask for anything back. She nodded once. Then why are you really here? He pulled something from his pocket. A folded piece of paper, old, worn at the corners. She recognized it instantly. Her first public policy outline from the Baltimore pilot, the one she'd left behind in his apartment before she moved out. "I kept it," he said quietly. "At first because I didn't want to forget what you taught me. Then, because I needed a reminder." He held it out. She didn't reach for it. "You can keep it," she said. A beat passed. Then she added, "You earned the memory." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know how to stand beside you, Callis. You didn't need validation. You were already complete. And I didn't know how to be with someone who didn't need me to be the loudest in the room." She looked at him. For the first time in months, she really looked at him. He looked older, not tired, changed. She took a step forward. "I was never trying to outshine you, Avon. I was trying to stand next to you. You moved." He nodded once. "I know that now." Silence again. She glanced at the front desk. The building was emptying out for the night. "You came alone?" He nodded. "Like I should have come to you before." "Why now?" He looked down. "Because last week I heard your name in a room I thought I owned. And no one mentioned me. No one cared that we used to be connected. They just cared about what you'd built. And I realized." He paused. "You're not my shadow. You never were. I was walking beside the sun, and I stepped away because I wasn't ready for the heat." That was the most honest thing he'd ever said. And she felt it, not in her chest, in her silence. Because that version of her, the one who would have broken at those words, was gone. In her place stood a woman who no longer needed them. They didn't hug, they didn't touch, but something shifted. He reached into his coat one more time. This time, a simple envelope, a handwritten letter. "No business, no ask," he said. "Just words I should have said when it mattered. Read it or don't." She took it, for the first time, and held it without opening. He gave her a nod, then turned and walked out. No backward glance, no hesitation, just the sound of glass doors opening, then closing behind him. She stood still, envelope in hand, memory behind her, legacy ahead, and for the first time in a long time, there was no weight to carry. Only truth. Callis didn't open the letter. Not that night. She tucked it into a drawer at the edge of her desk, then locked the office and stepped into the cold air of DC. It was crisp, unapologetic, like her silence. At the crosswalk, she noticed the billboard across from her office. Not hers, not about her, but about something she helped design. The Grace Initiative, a pilot mentorship program aimed at at-risk youth, now being adopted in 3 other cities. It didn't carry her name. She wanted it that way. Legacy didn't need lights. It needed longevity. Her phone buzzed. A message from Roseanne. "The joint summit's confirmed. Atlanta, March 7th. Panel lead, you." Callis smiled slightly. She hadn't applied for the position, hadn't lobbied, hadn't asked. She earned it. And suddenly, she realized the real reason Avon had come. Not to apologize, but to confirm what he already knew. She no longer needed proximity to him to have influence. She'd stepped into her own power, and never looked back. Later that weekend, she found herself in a quieter part of Baltimore, seated at a round-table meeting with city stakeholders. This time, no one blinked when she walked in. No one mistook her for a secretary. They paused their conversation and waited for her notes. The man sitting next to her leaned in mid-discussion. "Is it true you turned down the Maryland Equity Board role?" She nodded without flinching. "I'm building something else." His brows rose. "Bigger? Quieter," she answered. "But wider." That was all she said, but the room felt it. When the meeting ended, a young intern, barely out of undergrad, caught up to her in the hallway. "Miss Venra?" Callis turned. "You don't know me, but I read your piece on the school-to-prison pipeline in undergrad. It's why I'm here." Callis blinked. For the first time that week, emotion touched her face. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lorelei." "Lorelei Vicks." "Well, Lorelei, stay in the room, stay in the work, and never assume quiet means invisible." The girl nodded, eyes shining. Back in DC, Callis finally opened the envelope. No flowers, no timestamp, just black ink on white paper. Avon's handwriting was familiar, sharp, tidy, deliberate. Every word felt like it had been rewritten twice before landing on the page. He started with something she didn't expect. I always said you were brilliant. But I never admitted I feared that brilliance might outlive my name, that it might survive without me. Now I know that's exactly what it was meant to do. He didn't ask for anything. No second chance. No reconnection. Not even friendship. Only acknowledgement. There was a version of me that could have stood beside you, but I protected my ego instead of your presence. This is the version of me that regrets it, but no longer tries to fix it. Only honor it. Callis folded the letter once, then again, then tucked it away into the back of her journal. Not for safekeeping, for history. Some stories weren't meant to be erased, just ended with dignity. Weeks passed. Momentum built. Her initiative was now set to expand to 5 more states. Board leaders from major educational institutions had requested meetings, and during one quiet Tuesday afternoon, Callis stood at the back of a high school auditorium, watching students present their local reform plans, an idea seeded from one of her earliest town halls. No one pointed at her. No one announced her name. But one of the students quoted a line she'd written, without knowing. "Legacy doesn't start when we die," the girl said. "It starts when we stop needing recognition to keep doing the work." The room applauded. Callis didn't smile. She just blinked once and whispered to herself. She understood. That night, Rosen called. Her voice was lit with excitement. "You won't believe what the mayor's chief of staff said in the meeting today." "What?" "They said they want your next program to be embedded into the city's annual planning framework." Callis sat down. Rosen paused. "That's never happened before. They're building the budget around your outline." Callis didn't reply right away. Then, "Send me the planning dates." "You're not shocked?" Rosen asked. "I'm clear." There was silence. Then Rosen said it. "You used to wait for permission. Now the room waits for you." At home, Callis looked out the window. She thought of Avon, of what they were, of what they weren't, of what they would never be. And for once, it didn't hurt. It didn't linger. It just belonged to another version of her. A version who once needed his approval to feel seen. But now, she needed only one thing: alignment with who she was and who she refused to stop becoming. The atrium buzzed. Hundreds of guests filed into the convention center. Policymakers, innovators, executives, educators, investors. The Atlanta Joint Energy and Equity Summit was one of the most important events of the year, and for the first time, Callis wasn't in the audience. She was leading the main panel. No sponsors to thank, no alliances to tiptoe around. Her name alone carried the weight. The agenda read, Keynote Roundtable, Rebuilding Systems Through Equity Moderator, Callis Venra, CEO of Viracor. No Ms., no parentheses, no footnotes, just her. As she stood behind the curtain, Rosen checked the mic levels on her blazer. "You're calm," she said. "I'm ready," Callis replied. And she was. Not because she memorized her lines, but because she no longer needed approval to speak. She had earned the right to direct the conversation. Outside the curtain, someone in the crowd leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Didn't she used to be with Kyrell?" The colleague replied, "She's the reason Kyrell's changing their model." Avon was in the 4th row. He wasn't on the speaker list. He had declined when asked months ago, but when the final lineup came out, and her name sat at the top, he booked a flight. No press team, no assistant, just him in a grey suit, seated quietly, blending in. As the lights dimmed, the stage lit up. 4 other panelists followed behind her. She was last. The crowd hushed as she took the final seat, center stage. No opening joke, no big entrance, just presence. The moderator welcomed everyone, gave a few brief remarks, and turned to Callis for the first prompt. How do we build infrastructure that honors people who've never had a voice in shaping it? She looked directly at the audience. By starting with this truth, communities aren't broken. The systems that ignore them are. A few heads nodded, then more. The moderator asked follow-ups. Callis didn't flinch. She spoke plainly. Reform that doesn't include the voices it affects isn't reform. It's control with a different label. Every word landed. Not as attack, as instruction. And Avon felt it all. He didn't shrink. He didn't smirk. He just listened. This wasn't the woman he walked away from. This was the woman he'd never grown enough to stand beside. After the session, the crowd moved like water, surging toward her, forming a line of greetings and congratulations. Avon didn't join them. He stayed seated, then stood, slowly, once the flow cleared. He didn't approach right away. He waited until she stepped off stage. When their eyes met, she didn't blink, didn't smile. She walked over, confident, composed, untouchable. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. "I didn't come for me," he replied. She nodded. "You listened. I heard." A long pause. Then, "You changed," he added. "No," she said. "I became—" He didn't try to explain, didn't ask to reconnect. He simply said, "I'm glad the world finally sees what I couldn't hold." "Good," she replied, "because I won't ever shrink again." He nodded. No goodbye, no take care. She turned and walked toward her team. He watched her go, not with longing, with acceptance. Some people you don't return to, because their evolution wasn't designed to carry you. It was designed to free them. The post-panel lounge was upstairs, glass walls, minimalist seating, soft jazz in the background, reserved only for speakers, media, and board-level attendees. Callie stood near the tall windows, sipping water, her assistant Rosen organizing folders beside her. Across the room, people whispered. Vera Kaur's strategy model was mentioned by 3 firms today. She walked away from Roke and walked into an empire. She didn't burn bridges, she built a runway. And still, she said little. Let the results speak. Let the silence humble them. "Ma'am," Rosen whispered. "A board member from the National Equity Authority wants 5 minutes. Set it for next week," she replied. "Tell them I don't discuss anything that serious unless it's off the clock. I'm not an idea vending machine." Rosen smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Then the elevator pinged. People turned. It wasn't Aven. It was someone from the Government Affairs Bureau, but her eyes instinctively checked, and the moment passed. Later, in the downstairs gallery space, a small exhibit was set up by young student engineers. One of them, maybe 22, nervously adjusted a scale model of an urban hydrogrid they'd designed. Callis wandered past, alone. The young woman spotted her. Her breath hitched. "Miss Venra?" she asked. Callis paused. The girl straightened her posture but blurted, "You don't know what it means to see someone like me up there. You didn't just talk, you showed up. And I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you." Callis smiled gently. "What's your name?" "Ina," the girl said. "Then keep showing up, Ina. But not for them. For the ones who've never been invited into the room." "I will." Callis touched her shoulder lightly. "Not every legacy is money. Some are in the people who watch your rise and decide they're allowed to begin too." That night, back at the hotel, she ran a bath. No calls, no notifications. She took her time. At the edge of the tub, her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. She let it go. Then it buzzed again. Message: "I watched from the 4th row. I should have never stood in front of you. I was supposed to stand beside you. You didn't outgrow me. You just found your right size." Callis exhaled. She didn't reply. She didn't delete it either. A memory doesn't need to be erased to lose its power. Meanwhile, in a different city, Avon entered his penthouse alone. Lights came on automatically. His suit jacket landed on the couch. He poured a drink, didn't sip it, walked to the glass, and looked out at the city. Behind him, 2 picture frames sat on the shelf. One of him at a gala, one of him and Callis from 5 years ago. She was smiling in it. He was half turned toward her, as if even then he hadn't known where to look. He picked up the frame. then slowly turned it down, not in anger, but in truth. She didn't belong behind glass. She belonged on the cover of the next playbook. The following morning, Kalis's name hit 3 headlines. Billionaire CEO challenges equity status quo with live roundtable mic. Drop. Panel of the year? Kalis Venra's commanding presence redefines energy talks. She built her own table, and everyone came running. She didn't comment, didn't retweet, didn't repost. But later that week, she approved a new campaign slogan for Billionaire's next public rollout. It was just 2 words: built free. 3 months later, fall whispered through Manhattan like a quiet undoing, leaves curling, skies soft, people walking a little slower. Avon Roque sat in the back of a black Maybach, parked outside a private courthouse exit. He wasn't there for court. He was there for a signature. His driver said, "She's not out yet." He nodded once. In his hand, a document folder. Inside, the official dissolution paperwork for a subsidiary she once co-founded with him during their engagement. A quiet closing, no media release, no headline, no statements, just legal closure. Because some things don't deserve a ceremony, they just deserve an ending. Inside the courthouse, Kalis walked out through the side corridor, no lawyer in tow. Just her assistant, Rosen, a few steps behind. She handed the signed papers to a court clerk, nodded politely, and left through the east doors. 2 press members spotted her. One lifted a phone. Kalis raised one hand, not in dismissal, but pause. No comments today. Let the work speak. They backed off. No fuss, no camera rush, just respect. Outside, her car waited. A quiet black electric vehicle, unbranded, unlike the ones the old Avon Roque used to choose. Rosen opened the back door for her, then stepped in beside her. Once inside, Kalis asked, "Is the list finalized?" Rosen handed her a thin portfolio. Shortlisted, 5 universities, 2 think tanks, 3 youth programs. Kalis flipped through. "Don't print my name on the buildings. Don't hang portraits. Use the money to build places where they'll see themselves, not me." "Yes, ma'am." She leaned back, her voice calm. "Legacy is not a statue, it's access." In the Maybach, Avon watched the doors. No sign of her. Just a courier, minutes later, carrying the signed dissolution forms. The driver handed them to Avon. He opened the folder. There it was, her final signature. Neat, precise, no added notes, no words. Just an end. He didn't speak. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging that some things deserved no argument. He folded the papers back into the folder, then said quietly, "She doesn't hate me." His driver glanced in the mirror. "Sir?" Avon looked out the window. She didn't sign with anger. She signed like someone who'd already lived the freedom. Later that day, Kalis visited a quiet cafe near Gramercy. One of the baristas greeted her nervously. Ma'am, are you—" Kalis smiled. "I'm someone who wants a warm tea and the window seat." They chuckled, handed her the cup for free, and cleared the seat by the glass. Outside, 2 teenagers laughed over a shared phone. One of them had a Billionaire internship badge clipped to her hoodie. Kalis noticed, smiled, then took out a book and started reading. Sometimes, peace isn't grand. Sometimes it's just a quiet corner with hot tea, your name no longer in headlines, and the weight of old betrayals left exactly where they belong, outside the room. The sun sank low over Manhattan when Avon Roque returned to his penthouse. No entourage, no assistant, just the click of his shoes on imported stone tiles and the silence that used to be a luxury until it became punishment. He set the folder on his desk, walked past it, poured himself a glass of water, then stopped mid-step, realizing he had nowhere to send it. No toast to make, no one waiting on the other end of a phone to say, "It's done," because she wouldn't answer. She hadn't in months, and he hadn't earned it. In the hallway near the elevator, he paused before a door. One most guests assumed led to storage. He unlocked it. Inside, Her old office space. The room she used when they were engaged, back when he swore she'd always have equal say. The walls were still lined with floor-to-ceiling plans, social impact frameworks, old notes on youth equity partnerships, sticky notes with scribbled ideas. He never erased any of it, not one. In the center sat a sealed box labeled in her handwriting, "Leave behind. Let forward win." He'd never opened it. Until tonight, the lid lifted easily. Inside, a few things. A leather-bound journal, a photo of them, not romantic, but laughing during a brainstorming session, taken by accident. A folder titled Callis's Contingency, Equity Routes for Girls in Tech, and a card. Just one. He opened it. The front said, "Closure isn't always loud." Inside, in her handwriting, "If you ever return to this room, not to fight, not to correct, but to understand, then you'll finally see I wasn't trying to win, I was trying to heal, and I won't regret leaving you to learn that without me, no bitterness, no blame, just a steady truth." 2 blocks away, Callis walked into a youth panel event, not as a speaker. As a listener, she sat in the back, notebook in hand, watching 3 young women present a tech access initiative she'd once dreamed of creating when she was 24. They'd built it themselves, through one of her grants. They never mentioned her name. She liked that. She scribbled 2 notes. Invite them to the next roundtable. Fund them quietly. No branding. Just access. Back at the penthouse, Avon took the box, placed it in the center of the office, and sat down on the floor. No suit jacket, no audience, just him, reading her equity documents, reading her handwritten ideas that he once told her were idealistic. He stayed there for hours. And when the morning light broke through, he whispered the last words he'd say in that room. "You weren't asking me to catch up. You were waiting for me to stop pretending you were behind." The next week, a press release came from Vera Core, a new branch, Equity Tech Scholarships, but no press conference, no headline tie-in, no photos of Avon Roque shaking hands. Instead, a footnote at the end of the release, dedicated quietly to those who build legacies that don't require their name on the door. Callis read it, didn't react, didn't call anyone. She closed her laptop and went outside. Javen, now crawling fast, had his hands on a mini keyboard toy. He looked up at her and giggled, and she smiled, because some endings don't break you. They build the platform you were meant to stand on alone. He once built towers in her name, but she built futures in her own. And the last time he saw her name, it wasn't on paper. It was in the progress that no longer needed him. He thought power would protect him. He believed love was optional, expendable, replaceable, until she left and built something stronger than love, her own justice. She didn't fight for a seat at his table. She built her own and made sure he had to watch. If you've ever been pushed aside for someone else's ambition, if you've ever been treated like a temporary option when your loyalty was permanent, this story is your story. Comment revenge isn't loud if you've ever taken your power back without a single word. Like this video if you know quiet justice hits harder than any outburst. Share it with someone who needs to remember being left behind is sometimes the best beginning. And subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories for more tales where the underestimated win. Because love given freely should never be traded for power. And when it is, the one they overlooked becomes the one they'll never overcome.